So Warzone Season 3 Reloaded kicked off this past week, and honestly, quite a few weapons were changed, shifting the meta a bit. Today, given that it's another weekend, we're keeping with tradition here on the channel and taking a look at another top 10 loadouts video, this time focusing around the Season 3 Reloaded updated meta. So we're breaking down some of the weapons that moved up in the power rankings, down to the power rankings, and may have just entirely come into the fold or been removed altogether. So as we go along, drop your thoughts down below. Agree, disagree with this list, anything in particular you really enjoy using. As always with these videos, do keep in mind the meta is relatively healthy still. So while this list presented here is my pick for the top 10 meta loadouts, there are still a handful of weapons which we'll talk about as honorable mentions here that absolutely could fit that mold as either competitive or top tier weapons. So feel free to drop your thoughts below, but if you enjoyed the video, you find it at all insightful, do me a favor and drop a like on it. As well, if you're new to the channel, you'd like to stay up to date with all things Warzone, whether it be loadouts, tips and tricks, or updates as a whole, we've got you covered here on the channel, so make sure to hit the subscribe button. As well, only for this weekend, my friends over at Gamer Advantage have bumped up code ESPRESSO to 20% off site-wide and have an additional 10% off on certain frames and lenses. I think that the definitive recommendations that I always make of the Horizons are even on there as well, so 30% off the best blue light glasses on the market. That doesn't come around often, so check it out if you're at all interested. But that said, let's jump into it. First and foremost, let's start with the update notes, because what did Raven explicitly try and balance or shift? That's a crucial part of understanding where this list differs from other metas and where in certain areas it doesn't. Weapons that were adjusted to me that absolutely stand out and have some really big impact here start with the NZ41. I was really excited to see that this got a handful of buffs. I had a good time with the NZ before any sort of defined meta came into play right around the Vanguard integration, so I was excited to see if it would work out again. And on paper, this should have been a really good update for it. Buffs to the Orb Reaver 360mm barrel, Sakura rounds, Clouser rounds, and a few other attachments. It seemed awesome. But after using it for a night or two, it's definitely viable, but I don't know if I'd put it in my top 10 just yet. It's not bad, but it just feels weird and it wasn't really connecting. It was kind of like the bullet bleed and velocity was a little bit subpar. The Whitley, that was something that got a huge number of changes as well, with buffs to the min damage, max damage range, headshot, and neck multipliers, plus magazine adjustments to buff the 45 round and the 150 round BMG mags. I think this one you're gonna start seeing a lot more. Maybe a potential Bren replacement. Now the bar, again, on paper, this one looked pretty solid. Headshot damage multiplier increase, buffs to various magazines, and what I was really curious on and was really thinking I'd like the most was the buff to the BMG rounds, increasing that mag size, making it a little bit more truly viable. But I'll be honest with you, after playing with the BMG rounds and the Clouser rounds, I kind of like the Clouser rounds way more than the BMG. Now the Owen gun, that got a handful of changes that might just put it on the outside looking in or inside looking out, depending on what you enjoy with the weapon. But let's talk about the weapon builds. Firstly, before we jump into any of the newer builds here with this, the STG-44 still, in my mind, reigns supreme as perhaps easiest of weapons to pick up and use. Does it have the most firepower? Absolutely not. There, of course, are many other weapons that outclass it in damage, but when you take a look at just ease of use, it's absolutely right up there right now. So this, it's something that's easy to point, shoot, control the recoil with the right attachments. It's just an easy to use rifle. For this build, I'd highly recommend the Mercury Silencer, the VDD 760 barrel. Personally, I've gone to the 2.5 times optic, and if I may make a suggestion, I'd highly recommend this. I usually say that optics are a little bit more personal preference based, and they absolutely are, but having used the 3 to 6 times optic for so long and been using the STG since Season 3 kind of brought it back into the meta here, it is something that the 2.5 I think is way better, simply because the 3 to 6 times creates way more visual bounce, whereas the 2.5 times optic, while you don't have as much magnification, it makes it so that it feels like you don't have any recoil, which obviously for when you're controlling shots makes it way easier in a gunfight. Outside of that, the weighted stock, the underbarrel of the 1941 hand stop, the 8mm 60 Kurs round magazine, that is something you can use the 50. I've seen a lot of people go back and forth. Personally, I just like the Kurs a little bit better, I think, just because you're not sacrificing that damage. Then I'll run lengthened, the polymer grip, focus, and fully loaded. Outside of that, that's when I want to jump over to the bar. Now the bar, of course, as we mentioned, has all of those different attachments that were adjusted, and it makes it a little bit more competitive. Now, for this, it is very similar to other builds we've talked about before and other builds of the bar we've even talked about in the past, but I'd recommend the MX Silencer, the 27-inch barrel or the 30-inch barrel. It really comes down to what you want to sacrifice. The 30 sacrifices a little bit more of that ADS speed, movement speed, and sprint to fire speed, whereas the 27-inch barrel only sacrifices sprint to fire speed, aim, walking, movement speed, and hip fire accuracy. So you kind of got to gauge which one you think is a little bit better there, because they both do offer a little bit more control and of course some of that damage range or bullet velocity, but comes down to, again, which you find most important. Then I'd recommend the 2.5 times optic, the Chariot WR stock, the hand stop. The Clouser 40 round magazine is where I'm having the most success. The BMG rounds absolutely do pack way more punch than the normal rounds do, but also that decrease in fire rate absolutely can be something that hinders your ability, and with a little bit more recoil at a further distance, you might be a little bit more hard pressed to end up securing those kills. Now, if you can mitigate those factors, you can control those, absolutely try out the 40 or 60 round BMG rounds. Then I'll run lengthened, the polymer grip, hard scope, and fully loaded. After that, we're going to jump over to a non-Vanguard weapon, one that still has, as of recently, become one of my favorites to jump back into again, and statistically speaking, it does hold its own. That being the Bruin. Of course, this build you may very well be familiar with if you've been on the channel here since Modern Warfare 2019 and the Warzone era there. For this, I'd recommend the Monolithic Suppressor, the Summit Barrel, the Tac Laser, the VLK 3 times optic, or if you have the Hollow Sight with a blue dot, I'd recommend that as well. It's a bit more pinpoint precise, and then the 60 round magazine. We talked about it recently in our TTK weapons build, but honestly, I think this thing is right back in the top 10 overall, not just necessarily the TTK meta loadouts as well. So try that out for sure. But talking LMGs again, the Whitley is one that's kind of made its way back into the conversation here. And it's one that kind of is surprising me because it's been there for a while, but as of recently feels pretty good. And there's a ground loot version of it, so you can definitely start out pretty well. For this, I'd recommend the Mercury Silencer, the Gracie 28-inch barrel, the 2.5 times optic. Personally, I've been running the CGC R4 barrel. I'll run the pistol grip for additional sprint to fire speed and hip fire accuracy, though of course you can use that hand stop. I think that you can mitigate the recoil pretty well with these other attachments as well, so you can kind of use it for a little bit more speed. But then I'll run the 303 British 45 round magazine for that added fire rate and added control. Now you sacrifice a little bit in that bullet velocity and bullet penetration, and of course it doesn't have the extra damage like the 150 round box mags of the BMG rounds. Then I'd recommend the lengthened, the fabric grip, hard scope, and fully loaded. After that, we're going to jump over to some SMGs here, some that you're very familiar with, so we can absolutely breeze through these. Firstly, starting out with the MP40. That being one, of course, that we talked about before plenty of times, but it's still being the same build from before. That being the recoil booster, the short barrel, the Krosnick ISO 1M optic. Again, that's personal preference just for me. I like the iron sights on that. The folding stock, the pistol grip, the Gorenko 45 round magazine, lengthened, polymer grip, unmarked, and quick. Now, we're going to jump over to the Armaguerra, which did get a couple of buffs here and made it a little bit more viable, I think, than it previously was, which was already pretty solid for what it's worth. That build consisting of the recoil booster, the body 315mm, though it is something that the 550mm barrel isn't half bad either. It's just personal preference that I like the 315mm, and I'll also run some iron sights. The slate reflector is perfectly fine if you don't like the iron sights of this. Then the stock, I run the folding, the hand stop, the 9mm 60 round magazine. Personally, I switched off the 8mm Kerr's 72 round magazine just because I felt like I was losing out a bit too much in terms of that fire rate. So it's something I've gone back and forth with, kind of liking the 60 right now. Lengthened as the ammo type, fabric grip, hard scope, and quick. Now, outside of that, we're going to talk about the well gun, but as I'll mention in a second, there is going to be a bonus. So in terms of our SMG play, I'd kind of say the well gun and the next weapon itself may be tied relatively close, maybe one leapfrogging the other given the situation. But for this, the well gun, I'd highly recommend the short barrel build on this as opposed to the Shrouded that we've talked about before in the past. That being something that kills rather fast up close. That being the recoil booster, the Gawain short barrel, the GW03 optic, the removed stock, the hand stop, the Gorenko 40 round magazine, lengthened, fabric grip, fleet, and quick. Now, outside of that, again, the bonus of the Owen gun, it may seem very familiar, but we're going to make one key distinguishing feature of a change. Of course, you can keep your recoil booster, your slate reflector, your move stock, your 1941 hand stop, the Gorenko 72 round magazine, lengthened, fabric grip, acrobatic, and quick, but you actually want to take off a barrel. A no barrel build here is actually the most beneficial right now in terms of statistics, so it is something that, while it may seem weird to not fully kit out your weapon, you're going to want to do that. Outside of that, we're going to jump over to our final couple of weapons. Next, I want to talk about the Cooper, because this ended up seeing its bullet velocity increased here with this most recent update, making it something that is actually rather solid. And again, kind of pushing its way back into the meta here. This, I'd end up recommending our normal build we've talked about before, the MX Silencer, the Cooper Custom Barrel, the 3-6 times optic, the 45 RS stock, the hand stop, the 9mm 60 round drum mag, lengthened, polymer grip, hard scope, and fully loaded. Now, next, we're going to talk about 3 weapons in one, because as you may recognize, they are basically the same, Situationally, though, you may end up getting a little bit more out of certain weapons, but the QBZ, Vargo, and XM4 are the next ones up on deck here. And again, I say 3 in 1 because the builds, just like a lot of Cold War weapons, are identical. The GRU or Agency Suppressor, the Task Force Barrel, Axial Arms 3x Optic, the Spetsnaz or Field Agent Grip, and the 60-round magazine. That will round out all 3 of those and make them incredibly viable. Again, QBZ kind of replaced the AK-47 after some of the recent nerfs to that. XM4 is still solid, but you need to really be consistent with your headshots. And the Vargo ended up getting buffed here to make it a little bit easier to use, which is definitely nice, increasing its minimum damage and also headshot multiplier. Now, finally, the last weapon I want to talk about is a little bit of the Automaton, a weapon we've talked about before on the channel, and it's kind of made its way back into the meta here as of some of the adjustments to other weapons. For this, I'd recommend the MX Silencer, Anastasia Sniper Barrel, the 3-6x Optic, the Anastasia Padded Stock, the Hand Stop, the Sakura 75-round Drum Magazine, Lengthened, Polymer Grip, Tight Grip, and Fully Loaded. Again, like we said, we've talked about this one before on the channel, but definitely check this one out if you guys haven't done so already. Finally, with our snipers, of course, you do have that AX50, which is my preferred sniper. The ZRG also has one-shot kill potential with headshots, so that's up there as well. But for this, I'd recommend the AX50, the Mono Suppressor, Factory Barrel, Tac Laser, Vanguard Arms Assassin Stock, and the Stippled Grip Tape, maximizing this for a little bit more of that ADS speed and making it a quick snap sniper, kind of taking place of the Kar 98K from beforehand. Outside of that, though, I mean, there are a handful of honorable mentions. The H4 Blixen or the Carl Gustav, that is something that right now I think has a lot of potential to be a meta weapon, but it's bugged currently, which that bug features a massive delay when firing. And I think that if that's fixed up, you have a potential to have a really good weapon here out of this, but right now it's just more of a hindrance if you're ending up going into multiple gunfights. If you need to use any of your equipment, that bug will get you killed. So right now it's kind of on the back burner. I expect it to maybe make its way in, but for right now, we're kind of holding it off for that reason, that it's just bugged. The NC41 has potential, but again, it just felt off to me. Something I think about the bullet velocity, the lead that you had to do on enemies, it wasn't really checking out as easily as other weapons, so for that reason, it's definitely viable. I just don't know that I'd put it in the top 10 meta. And then the PPSH, of course, being a weapon we've talked about before, that is also a great weapon, but there's just a handful of SMGs that I'd take ahead of that. But overall, that's my list here for the top 10 meta weapons here within the Season 3 Reloaded update, so let me know your thoughts down below. Do you agree with this? Have anything you'd subtract or add to the list? Whatever the case, drop it down below. But before we wrap everything up, a reminder, check out my friends over at Gamer Advantage. If you're like me, who's on a device nearly 24/7, especially for me, in my case, on my PC, gaming, recording, editing, whatever the case, combating blue light over the years has been something I've always struggled with. From eye fatigue to sleeping habit issues, I've had it all, and I've searched for the best help available. Gamer Advantage is just that, the best on the market. Their products are incredibly comfortable, durable, and most importantly, clinically proven. I'd highly recommend the Horizon frames here, which I actually think have an additional 10% off bonus right now, so you can get those for 30% off your entire order, which doesn't happen often. If you guys are at all interested in protecting your vision health, check the link in the description below. They do a phenomenal job of explaining everything. Me, I like to have things explained to me like I'm 5 sometimes, so they do a great job of explaining the benefits and long-term reasons why you should check them out. Right now, the entire site with code Espresso is 20% off, some stuff even being 30%. This kind of deal doesn't come around often, so if you guys are at all interested, check the link in the description below, and maybe use code Espresso at checkout. That said, thanks so much for watching. That's what we're going to call it. So again, drop your thoughts below. If you enjoyed the video, do me a favor and drop a like on it. As well, if you guys are new to the channel, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single thing regarding all things Warzone, best loadouts like this, tips and tricks, updates, anything like that, we got you covered. And of course, Modern Warfare 2 content here coming very, very soon. That said, thanks so much for watching. My name is Espresso. I'll see you guys later. Take care and peace.